Well, welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to go get something to drink and eat, get the blood circulating a little bit. We have just a little bit more to go on traditional and modern history. This is part 2 of this week's week 1 video. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, we're going to look at a little bit more on traditional and modern history and then work on or look at week 1 literary pack. So we're trying to figure out how to recognize this divide, this 1700s, mid-1700s. Why is that a date that we're going to use to determine or distinguish between traditional history and modern history? And we looked at several different components, whether it was population and this peak, real income and the Malthusian trap, whether it was culture and religion or science, whatever. Those were some indicators. But let's take a look at some more here. So here's the first one. And again, these charts and graphs are all in your packet. So let's take a look at this first category. The first category is on energies. So traditional history, you have natural energy and power. It was animal power. You took the ox and put the plow to the ox, and the ox would put you through the field. Water power was another one. Wind power or fire. These were all parts of energy. Heating, the way things moved, and how you propelled things. Whereas in the modern history, you have a switch. Now you end up with not natural energies and powers, you end up with man-made energies and powers. For instance, coal and fossil fuels, utilizing those, mining those, bringing those out and using those for all sorts of things. Steam power, locomotion, these are all things that sort of develop in that 1700s into the 1800s. Let's look at another one. This is just living. Where do people live? So rural and agricultural living was that was the traditional place that people lived. They were out in the outskirts. They're on farms. They're on little villages. In fact, less than 10% of the people living in towns, or less than 10% of the population lived in towns that were bigger than 2,000 people. So, I mean, consider the millions and millions of people that were living, and only less than 10% of those people were in a town, and even the town is not even as big as our own little town here. That's traditional history. That's what had been going on for thousands of years. Whereas in modern history, you had this migration to urban or industrialized cities, bigger cities, movements to London, movements to Boston, places like that where you had more of an urban feel, a city feel. The industry was there. And that was a huge change that totally changed the landscape of both the family as well as many nations. Again, back to the real income, that Malthusian trap. Static economies. It just kind of was like stayed the same forever and ever and ever. Never really rise, never really dropped. It just kind of stayed in a kind of a mundane, poor sort of situation. Subsistence living, it basically means that I go out in my backyard and I dig up something and I plant something, and that's basically what I live off of. I subsist off of that, whatever it is I can grow, or whatever cattle I can raise, or whatever I can hunt. And there's very little surplus. There's very little left over. I can't take my potato crop, feed my family, and then take the leftovers and go to the market and sell it. That was not the traditional sort of living that we see prior to the 1700s. Whereas once modern history hits, there's fluctuating economies. Some economies go really high and they're very rich, and people that live in those economies, even the poor people in those economies, start to do really well. There's this development of a middle class, this in-between. They're not poor, they're not rich, they're in between, and they're very comfortable. There's lots of economic growth. There's development of that middle class, like I said. And there is now significant surplus. I can now take this and take it into the market. I could ship it overseas. I can trade it. I can get goods that are not common to my region. My village, great on potatoes, very bad on carrots. I don't know, something else, something they may want. Maybe it's coal. So I take my surplus of potatoes, I go to the next village, who is a mining village. They have lots of coal, they have no potatoes. We trade. Now my life is better in that I can trade resources. I'm not so limited to just what I have on my farm. Another one, traditional history. You had very unstable lives, but a very stable community. Consider sort of like the village again. Lives, anything can destabilize the people. It could be plague, flood. It could be a people group coming in, the Mongols coming in and just tearing up everything. You didn't have a very stable life. But your community, the people that you grew up with, are the same people that you grew up with. You were born there, you were raised there, and you married there, had kids there, and died there. Everything that it's a very stable sort of community. You didn't go outside the community, you stayed within it. Whereas in modern history, now people are sort of scattering, they're moving outside, people are coming and going into this village. Now you had a longer, more secure life, a better life, but communities were disrupted. So in the time of the Industrial Revolution in America, you had farm families, daughters and maybe even mothers might go out of the family unit and go to some mill region and work in the mills for extra money and then come back. Well, that disrupts the community of the family. It's not the same. Mama didn't stay home and the girls stayed home and they all kind of, supported the family. Dad and the rest of the family kind of went out and worked the fields. That's very, very different in the modern history. It's very much changes in the way we lived. It's changes in the way people saw their roles as male and female, father and mother, son and daughter. And people moved a lot. They moved all over the place. There was a lot of migration throughout different regions. People went to where the opportunities were. Traditional faith, like we said, traditional faith was hard, unstable life needs solace. And what I mean by that is, if life is rough and you have no way to fix it, to resolve it, it lends itself to the need or the dependence upon some higher power, something that you can reach out to, some hope that allows you that solace, that peace, that, hey, it's going to be okay, life is going to get better. That's under tradition. In this region, in this category, humans pretty much are at the submission of whatever nature throws at them. So in different cultures, you will see the people coming to their god, their idol, and offering sacrifices for having a child or for rain so that their crops will grow, or to get rid of famine. It was always to appease the gods, so to speak, under that one. But under modern, there are growing challenges from science. There's advances, there's innovation, there's improvements in so many different things that it tries to marry faith with an understanding and investigation of what is seen. So rather than just sort of like taking floods for granted, it's like, oh, it's there and I can't do anything about it. Science and engineering and innovation would come up with ways to, how do I buttress my village? Do I put it on a higher ground? How can I divert waters around my village? What kinds of things can I use to block or levee floods? I mean, things like that. And so it gives more, or at least gives the appearance that humans have more control over nature. They're not just, nature just doesn't like beat them up. They can actually fight back a little bit. They can manipulate nature a little bit in their environments. So that's another one of modern deal. Local identity and culture. Most people were born, lived, married, and died within a 30 or 50 mile radius of their initial birthplace. Keep in mind, news is very limited. You don't hear anything outside of, your local region. You're not finding out what's happening in America. You're not finding out what's happening in China or about trade or any kind of opportunities. You're really limited to whatever's there. Printing press is not really up and running. You don't have that communication going back and forth. Sense of community and place in the world is pretty much, I live in this place and this is the world. Very centralized. Many more languages are spoken at this time, many more dialects within different regions. Modern, you have more mass identity, big picture identity, larger cultural influences and sharing. There's a sharing of ideas and cultures and crafts and innovation and knowledge. Fewer languages, there's more shared languages at this time. Much more interdependence upon outsiders because now you have trade and you have comings and goings. There's a greater level of travel and trade, and there's a vast knowledge is being shared globally. And lastly, under traditional histories, we had pretty much weak kingdoms. They were very simple states. You had the king or the duke or the landlord or the warlord, and then you had this hierarchy underneath them. It wasn't very well organized, and if the guy on top wanted something to be done within the ranks, it may take a long time and get all jumbled to get to the lower ranks to get something done. So it's not very efficient. Whereas in modern history, we have better communication. We have even the birth of the telegram, later the telephone. There is greater international influences. We're learning from one another. Political involvement captures greater percentage of the population. It's more governments for the people, of the people, by the people. So people are more involved. It's not just the one dude or one queen at the top that's kind of making all the decisions. And again, as we said before, we're always coming back to this, that those are different situations. There's developments that are happening, innovations that are happening, attitudes that are changing, producing problems as well as opportunities. People are weighing those, producing choices or creating choices and making decisions, and that's how the world is rolling on. So let's go to week 1 literary pack. This is a book by Ian Mortimer. It's called The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval History. It is literally, he is going to be your tour guide of England in the 1400s. He's going to just parachute you right in the middle of England and take you around and sort of describe what life is like. What you're to do is you're to read chapter 1. It's been produced for you in PDF on the Google Classroom. What I want you to do is compare the author's descriptions of towns and cities and rural living to the charts that we just detailed in that traditional versus modern history deal. Tell me what elements can you identify? It's not just the towns. Think about what's behind his descriptions. And we'll have a conversation about that in our next class. So look for your homework in the Google Classroom for this week's assignments. There will be several. And next week, we'll look at the world in the 1760s and the Great Divide. That's where we are for right now. Again, I hope that you are able to get through this. Please email me or Mrs. Kolb any questions, or if you have any problems with anything, please let us know and we will get back to you. Other than that, have a great adventure on week 1. Bye.